he was 18 years old, he made a decision that would end up haunting him for years afterward. It started with something unbelievably stupid and impulsive. He and two friends were walking around Walmart late at night, messing around and acting reckless the way teenagers sometimes do when they think nothing bad can actually happen to them. Somewhere during that trip, one of them suggested stealing a phone. At first, it sounded like a joke, but the longer they stood there, the more confident he became that he could actually pull it off. He convinced himself it would be easy, open the packaging, slide the phone into his hoodie pocket, and casually walk out the front door like nothing happened. In his mind, he had already imagined getting away with it. But what he didn't realize was that loss prevention had been watching him the entire time. Before he even got close to the exit, security stopped him. Within minutes, the situation completely spiraled out of control. Police arrived, his hands were cuffed behind his back, and suddenly he was sitting in the back of a police car, staring out at the same Walmart parking lot he had walked into less than an hour earlier. What made it worse was the timing. It was Friday night, meaning court wouldn't reopen until Monday morning. He kept telling himself there had to be some mistake. Maybe they'd give him a ticket. Maybe his parents could come pick him up. But instead, officers informed him he'd be spending the weekend in county jail. The second he heard that, reality hit him harder than anything else ever had. He had never been arrested before, never suspended from school, never been in serious trouble, and now, over one unbelievably dumb decision, he was about to be locked inside a jail with complete strangers. But the arrest itself wasn't even the worst part. The real nightmare didn't begin until he met the man who called himself Bob. After hours of fingerprinting, paperwork, questioning, and waiting inside holding cells, he was eventually handed an orange jumpsuit and escorted deeper into the jail. The second he changed clothes, everything suddenly felt real. Up until that point, part of him still believed he'd somehow wake up from the nightmare. But standing there in jail-issued clothing, surrounded by strangers, made him realize there was no escaping the situation now. The holding area was packed with loud inmates, many of whom looked like they had spent years cycling in and out of jail. He immediately stood out. He looked young, terrified, and completely unprepared for that environment. Some inmates mocked him almost instantly, calling him pretty boy and laughing at how nervous he looked. He tried to keep his head down and avoid eye contact, but the fear was obvious all over his face. Eventually, officers assigned him to a small cell with a man in his 40s who introduced himself as Bob. At first, Bob actually seemed decent. He spoke calmly, unlike many of the other inmates. He explained how meals worked, how to avoid drawing attention, and how important it was not to appear weak around certain people. For a little while, the narrator genuinely believed he got lucky with his cellmate, but slowly the conversation started becoming uncomfortable. Bob began asking increasingly personal questions. Where did he live? Did he have a girlfriend? Was he still living with his parents? What school did he go to? Every answer only seemed to encourage more questions. Then the comments started. Bob repeatedly mentioned how young he looked and how he didn't belong there. The tone slowly shifted from friendly to deeply unsettling. He started sitting too close during conversations. He touched the narrator's shoulder several times while talking. At one point, he even rested his hand on his knee while laughing. Every instinct immediately told him something was wrong. From that moment forward, being locked inside that tiny cell with Bob became terrifying. The only time he could breathe was when the doors opened and inmates were allowed back into the common area. But even there, he constantly felt Bob staring at him. Then, one night, he woke up suddenly and saw Bob leaning over the top bunk, watching him silently in the dark. And that was the moment he realized this weekend in jail could become something much worse. By the time Monday finally arrived, he felt mentally destroyed. Those 48 hours inside the jail felt longer than any week of his life. He barely slept, barely ate, and spent most of the time counting down the hours until release. When the judge finally approved his release and his father picked him up, he wanted nothing more than to forget the entire experience ever happened. His dad wasn't yelling or furious. Somehow, the disappointment in his voice felt worse than anger. Once he got home, he showered, laid down in his own bed, and tried convincing himself that the nightmare was over. For a few days, life slowly began returning to normal. Then, one evening, he noticed a strange Instagram account had followed him. The account looked fake immediately. No posts, no real name. The profile picture was dark and blurry. At first, he ignored it because random accounts followed him all the time. But later that night, the account sent him a direct message. When he opened it, his stomach instantly dropped. It was a selfie of Bob. Same expression, same unsettling smile he used to give him inside the jail cell. Underneath the photo was a short message that simply read, "Miss you already." Panic hit him immediately. He blocked the account without responding and threw his phone across the bed. What terrified him most wasn't the message itself. It was the realization that Bob somehow knew his full name and had managed to track down his social media profile after getting released. He had never told Bob his Instagram handle. He barely even remembered mentioning his last name, yet somehow this man had found him in the real world. From that point on, he started constantly looking over his shoulder. Every strange car suddenly felt suspicious. Every unknown number calling his phone made his chest tighten. But things escalated far beyond creepy messages online, because only 2 days later, someone showed up outside his house. A few days after receiving the Instagram message, he came home from work during the late afternoon while both of his parents were still gone. The weather outside was foggy and gray, giving everything an already unsettling atmosphere. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed an old beat-up car parked across the street. Someone was sitting inside with their head lowered toward the steering wheel. Something about the scene immediately felt wrong. The person inside wasn't moving at all. He stayed in his own car for a few seconds watching the vehicle, trying to convince himself he was just being paranoid after the weekend in jail. Eventually, he hurried inside the house and locked the front door behind him. A few minutes later, while standing alone in the kitchen, he suddenly heard the front doorknob rattling violently. Whoever was outside wasn't knocking or ringing the bell. They were actively testing the handle like they were trying to enter the house quietly. The rattling stopped for about 30 seconds before he heard the exact same thing happening at the back door. That was the moment pure panic took over. He immediately called 911 and tried whispering into the phone because he was terrified the person outside would hear him talking. While he explained the situation to the operator, the doorbell suddenly rang. The operator asked if he could see who was outside, but he was too scared to even look through the window. He admitted to her that he thought it might be the man he shared a jail cell with. Officers eventually arrived, but by then, both the person and the suspicious car had disappeared completely. When he explained everything about Bob, the fake Instagram account, and the attempted break-in, he could feel the officers becoming skeptical the second he admitted he had recently been in jail himself. One officer even implied he might simply be paranoid after the experience. That response frustrated him badly because deep down he knew this situation was real. For the next week, nothing happened, and slowly he started believing maybe it truly was over. But then, during a night out with friends, he saw a familiar face sitting quietly at the end of a bar. And the second that face looked up and smiled at him, all the fear came rushing back. About a week after the attempted break-in, he went out to a dive bar with several friends who knew nothing about his arrest or what had happened afterward. He was trying desperately to return to normal life and stop obsessing over Bob. For most of the night, things actually felt normal again. Music was playing, people were laughing around the pool tables, and for the first time in days, he felt like maybe the nightmare was finally fading away. Then he glanced toward the far corner of the bar and froze instantly. Sitting alone at a small table was Bob. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face like he didn't want to be recognized, but there was no mistaking him. At first, Bob wasn't even looking in his direction. Then slowly he lifted his head, made direct eye contact, and smiled. The exact same smile from the jail cell, the exact same expression from the Instagram selfie. His entire body went cold. His friends immediately noticed something was wrong and asked if he was okay. Not wanting to explain the horrifying truth in the middle of the bar, he lied and claimed there was someone there he didn't want to deal with. He insisted they leave immediately. The entire walk toward the parking lot, he kept expecting Bob to appear behind them. Every second felt tense. Once outside, he called an Uber but begged his friends not to leave him alone while he waited. The fear had become overwhelming at that point. As soon as he got inside the Uber, he finally called his parents and told them the full truth about everything that had been happening. That same night, his parents drove with him straight to the police station. This time, with screenshots of the Instagram message and his parents backing up his story, officers finally took the situation seriously. He signed official statements and eventually received a temporary restraining order. During that process, he also discovered something disturbing. Bob wasn't even the man's real name. Authorities explained how easily inmate information and arrest records could sometimes be accessed through public systems. Somehow, after being released, this man had managed to gather enough information to track him down in real life. Thankfully, after the restraining order, he never saw Bob again. But years later, the experience still haunted him because he realized one stupid decision inside Walmart had nearly connected him permanently to someone incredibly dangerous. The second story began with simple curiosity. During a short-lived relationship, the narrator constantly drove past a massive abandoned building, sitting alone in the distance, surrounded by trees and open fields. The place looked like something straight out of a horror movie. It had tall, arching roofs, tiny windows, and a giant cross mounted near the top of the structure. Every time she passed it, she became more fascinated by it. After the relationship ended, she still couldn't stop thinking about the building. Eventually, she told her friend Laura about it, and together they decided to explore it themselves late one night. Around 1 a.m, they parked on the side of the road and walked nearly 10 minutes through darkness toward the abandoned structure. The second they stepped inside, they realized the building was an old prison. The smell of mold and rotting wood filled the air, while broken debris covered the floor. Massive cell blocks stretched through the darkness around them. The entire place felt unstable and dangerous. After hearing loud crashing noises echo somewhere deep inside the building, both girls decided it was time to leave. But before they could escape, Laura suddenly spotted someone standing silently at the far end of the room near the prison cells. A man slowly raised his hands and introduced himself as Mike. He calmly claimed to be a security guard assigned to protect the building from trespassers. At first, his explanations sounded believable. He spoke smoothly and confidently without hesitation, but something about him felt wrong immediately. His clothes didn't resemble a security uniform at all. He wore jeans, sneakers, and a dark sweatshirt. When the girls tried leaving through the way they entered, Mike claimed part of the ceiling had collapsed and blocked the exit. He insisted there was another, safer way out through the back of the prison. Desperate to escape, they followed him deeper into the building until they reached a narrow hallway leading toward a staircase descending into complete darkness underground. That's when everything changed. Mike suddenly stepped aside, opened the door, and quietly said, "After you." Laura refused immediately. The tension became unbearable. Then Mike grabbed the narrator's arm and tried guiding her down first. Laura reacted instantly by shoving him away and screaming for her friend to run. Both girls sprinted through the prison as fast as possible. The terrifying part was they never once found any collapsed ceiling blocking the original exit. Mike had lied the entire time. And later, when police confirmed the abandoned prison had no security guards whatsoever, the horrifying realization finally set in. Whoever that man was, he had never intended to help them leave. The final story came from a corrections officer who moved across the country for a new job at a local jail. Only about a week after starting there, he met an inmate named Edgar. At first, Edgar seemed completely normal, respectful, quiet, and cooperative. Unlike many inmates, he never caused problems or acted aggressive toward staff. But one day, completely out of nowhere, Edgar casually asked him how his brother Stan was doing. The question immediately caught him off guard because nobody at the jail knew he even had a brother named Stan. He convinced himself it had to be a coincidence, but a few days later, Edgar mentioned his mother, Diana, and even referenced the fact she lived near a lake. That was no coincidence anymore. The corrections officer became deeply disturbed because there was no logical explanation for how this inmate could possibly know such specific information about his family. Edgar had supposedly lived his entire life on the opposite side of the country and had no known connection to him whatsoever. Then things became even stranger when Edgar casually asked whether his nephew still liked baseball. At that point, the corrections officer finally reported everything to his supervisor, but she dismissed his concerns and suggested Edgar was probably just trying to provoke a reaction. Even after that conversation, Edgar remained calm, polite, and strangely friendly. Eventually, the inmate was released, but before leaving the facility, Edgar smiled and quietly said, "Maybe I'll see you around." Months later, someone began appearing outside the corrections officer's house late at night, claiming to sell meat from a truck. The man wore a hood that concealed most of his face. During the second visit, the corrections officer used his Ring camera to threaten calling law enforcement. That's when the visitor slowly lifted his head and revealed himself. It was Edgar, the same inmate who somehow knew intimate details about his family despite having no connection to them. Even worse, after leaving the property, Edgar simply walked away into the darkness instead of getting into any truck at all. The corrections officer later discovered Edgar had virtually no personal history, no stable address, no known relatives, almost no traceable records. Then, one night, someone rang the doorbell at his girlfriend's house late at night before disappearing into the darkness moments later. To this day, he still doesn't know how Edgar learned so much about his family or how far the stalking actually went. And years later, he still fears waking up one night to find Edgar standing outside his mother's house.